This is Dr. Robert Watkins, orthopedic spine surgeon to professional athletes and creator of the Back Doctor app.
Hi everyone, good evening. I'm Robert Watkins joining you again from Mar Vista. This is part 2 of our series called Homeless in Mar Vista. Part 2 is the mobilization. And this is about once we learned what was going on in our neighborhood, how people living on the street were taking advantage of the new homeless laws and selling drugs, doing drugs, breaking into our neighborhood, stealing everything, and causing general chaos, about what we did about it, how we started to mobilize, what we learned. And it's been quite an adventure, and I hope what we've learned may help some people out there who are struggling with a similar thing. And it's obviously occurring in many communities all over America, but especially Los Angeles, and in my neighborhood specifically, in the greater West LA. So what we did, once I found out, yes, last week's was the awakening, and I found out this was going on, what I did was I realized most of my neighbors don't know this is happening. I started talking to people, and they're like, oh yeah, I noticed a few homeless people down there, you know, and I was like, no, this is a whole drug scene and crime scene going on that we need to get on top of, because it's coming up into the alleys, and I'm seeing people walking up and down our street checking out our places, and my neighbor gets ransacked right next door. Like, we got to get on top of this. So I wrote a letter. First thing I did was write a letter, wrote a whole page letter to all my neighbors, went door to door, dropped it in their mailbox, you know, gave it to some people, and I basically said, look, this is what's happening, and if you're interested in helping me do something about it, here's my cell phone, here's my email. Text me, email me. We started a text chain where basically anybody want to be on the text chain. That was more for urgent matters, and we're still doing it, where if you see somebody walking up the street that looks suspicious, doesn't quite look right, take their picture, shoot a video. If you're getting broken into, call 911, obviously, but try and at least let's be on the same page. We got a lot of concerned, good people here. Let's get on the same page and look out for each other. And obviously you got to be careful. You don't want to profile anybody and overreact, and you know, but at the same time, if somebody doesn't belong here, be aware of it and let people know. And especially if people are home alone and they're defenseless and they're old or whatever else, you know, let's help each other out. And that was great. I really got to know our neighbors better. And it helped kind of pull us together. We also started an email chain with information, articles, and new information going on in meetings, community council meetings, and different stuff like that. We started an email chain too for less urgent matters. And then we also started a Google Drive, where on the Google Drive you set it up. Anybody can submit photos and submit stuff, and then one person would organize it. And that would go directly to a captain in the LAPD that we had at that meeting and made contact with, who was responsible for our neighborhood. And we tried to not overwhelm with too much stuff, but used needles, where all the used needles we're finding. We got pictures of people shooting up in public. We got people who we've connected with different cars and going from the encampment up our street and with 5 stolen bikes and stuff like that. So we helped the LAPD. And another thing I did is I got a bunch of information, pictures, collected it from other neighbors, put it all together. I went to the Pacific Division LAPD, showed up, you know, one night after working all day, and told this story to this girl working at the front desk, and she was just blown away. She was like, that was the most interesting thing I've heard in months. And the head of narcotics was there, so I sat down, talked to him, told him the whole story. And part of it is like telling the LAPD is going to them and telling them, look, we want your help. I take care of a lot of LAPD as patients, and I've talked to them at the Mar Vista Farmers Market and our protest, which I'll tell you about. And a lot of the cops I talked to said, look, we're kind of worried that if we get videoed hassling a homeless person or somebody suspected of stealing drugs or bikes, and it gets videoed, well, then we look bad. If there's a complaint filed against an LAPD officer, I'm pretty sure about this, their current rank gets frozen. They cannot rise up in ranks until that dispute is resolved, and that may take 6 months or a year. So, and I'm not 100% pro LAPD. They've got a bad history of a lot of issues and stuff. But at the same time, I went to the LAPD and said, look, we want you in our neighborhood. We are dying here. We need help. We're getting overrun, and we're trying to put ourselves out there and help out. But I don't have a gun. What am I going to do to protect myself? I can get some pepper spray off Amazon. That's it. And so we need your help. And what can we do to work together to help? And it helped. We saw a lot more cops in our neighborhood, circling around and everything else. You see him, you wave to him. Remember the old days? You see a cop, hey, how you doing? Thank you. Thanks for being here. Have a good day. You know, I felt like something out of the 1950s, but it was like, no, we need you back. Come back, help us out, and we'll support you and support us. And that was effective. It helped. We got at least 2 or 3 drug dealers who got arrested in our neighborhood. And that's where I found out one of them that got arrested got a 120-day sentence for a non-violent crime, even though you're selling heroin. Heroin's not considered violent, so it's a non-violent crime. And due to Prop 47, he was out got a lesser sentence and then was out in 21 days. So we helped bust this heroin dealer, and he's out in 21 days. He's back on our streets. And again, he knows what we look like. We're driving around, walking around, talking to him, talking to other people, find out what's going on. They know who we are. They know my car, everything else. And so that was really alarming. Like, here we did all this work. A great success story. 21 days? You got to be kidding me. This is a real threat to us, and what do we need to do about it? And that's where I learned about Prop 47. I didn't even know what Prop 47 really was. I said, I better do some research. I better get on my Wikipedia and start doing some research. And after this talk, I'll post 3 of the top articles that I've read that I think will be enlightening. I've got like 30 of them. I'll give you the top 3. If anybody wants any more, I'll post those too. Maybe I'll post the top 5 or something like that. But Prop 47 was interesting, and I'll talk a bit about that. Tonight's episode, I want to tell you what we did, but also share some of the information. I'm probably going to speak really quickly because there's a lot of laws and bills that I've learned about that I want to share with you, at least the gist of what's going on in California and in Los Angeles. Another thing that happened is after a couple of the drug guys got busted is some of the neighbors' houses got vandalized, spray painted right across the front of the house. And I think it was direct retribution, that they knew where they lived, and they were telling them that, look, you keep reporting this to the cops, this may happen. And so it was pretty scary. And so another thing I found out from the LAPD is that part of the issues is that if somebody gets busted for a nonviolent drug offense, selling drugs or doing drugs in public or if you get caught for stealing less than $950, that it's such a slap on the wrist that a lot of judges wouldn't even take the cases because it was just a waste of time. I talked to one police officer who said he busted somebody for selling drugs in public, went in, and then he was doing drugs in public. This guy was shooting up under a bridge. And he goes in and he takes the guy to the police station. The criminal who was doing this in public got released before the cop finished doing the report and was able to leave. So literally, and the other part, and the cops refer to Prop 47 as catch and release, like fishing, where you catch somebody and we release them immediately. And I've talked to cops who basically said it was just very disheartening. They're still doing their job, but what's the point of busting people for drugs and public intoxication and stealing bikes and all this stuff? Is just a slap on the wrist. It's a waste of time, especially if you don't even feel like your community really wants you there because they're going to video you and tell you you're hassling everybody. So anyway, let's get to Prop 47. And the history of Prop 47 is that the prison system in California, back in the 80s and 90s, we had 3 strikes, 3 felonies, and then you would get at least like 20-year sentence in prison. The 3 strikes, everybody knows that. And then the other one is the war on drugs. And both of those things are attributed for causing an overcrowding of the California state prisons. So then what happened in 2001, so basically the federal government said, look, you got overcrowding. This is an abuse of the 8th Amendment, cruel and unusual punishment. You got to uncrowd your California state prisons. So in 2001 in California, we passed a bill that basically said nonviolent crimes will be sent to county jails instead of state prisons. And so that decreased the state prison population, so we'd be compliant. Now the county jails got overflooded, and so now people get early release from county jails. That's why most likely that drug dealer we busted, 120-day sentence, he's out in 21 days because the county jails are overcrowded. So we just passed the buck from the state system down to the county system. And then in 2014, we passed Prop 47. And basically what that did, it reduced 6 nonviolent crimes from felonies down to misdemeanors. And that included drug offenses and stealing under $950. It used to be $500. They raised up to $950. So Prop 47 allowed the state to comply with the federal ruling on decreased prison population, and it also potentially saved the state of California $68 million in 2017. But at the expense of petty crime. And it's been documented that shoplifting and breaking into cars has increased in the past couple of years after the passage of Prop 47. But also part of the thing that I sense in my neighborhood is I think it's changed the environment where drug dealers and drug addicts and people stealing stuff, they're not really scared. You used to get multiple offenses for like shoplifting and for stealing stuff, and they could add up, and then it would end up in a bigger misdemeanor or felony. That doesn't happen anymore. These things don't add up. So that's why, to me, the drug dealers and the drug addicts are doing it in public now. I mean, we literally see people selling drugs and making exchanges in public, right 2 blocks from my house. I saw a guy in Starbucks 2 weeks ago on my way to surgery at 6:45 in the morning, and a guy shot up right in front of the Starbucks and passed out and was nodding off right there. So they don't care about doing it in public anymore because of Prop 47. At least a big part of it is that the penalties aren't that bad and they don't add up. And that's a fundamental issue. Yeah, we decrease the prison population, but one of the fundamental questions is, where did they go to? So if we decrease thousands of people out of California state prisons, where are they? Was there job retraining? Did they have an apartment? Are they living in a place? Or are they some of the people who are living down on the corner of our streets now? Because where'd they go? Who tracked that? I want some data on that. So the summary of Prop 47, yes, it decreased the populations of prisons and it saved us money. But where the criminals go, number two, is the increase in thievery for anything under $950 and drug use and drug dealing in public has increased. So then I started going to the community council. My brother's a community council member, or he likes to be referred to as His Excellency now. But there's one for every community in Los Angeles, and they report to your councilman. Our councilman is Mike Bonin for our district, and there's 13 councilmen in all of LA. So I'm learning all these things just in the past 3 months, crash course. And what I found at the community council meeting was a lot of angry neighbors. I found a lot of people from all over Mar Vista that were upset, and the same thing was going on in their neighborhoods. And I met Hannah, who's really nice. She's Councilman Bonin's one of his assistants who comes to the meetings, and she's very gracious, spends time to talk to us. She takes a lot of heat. People really yell at her and raise their voice, and she stays strong, and I really appreciate her coming. But I also found that some of her excuses for what was going on were just unacceptable. Like, she basically said, our hands are tied. We can't do anything about the people living on the street and doing all the drugs and stuff like that, because our hands are tied because of the Boise decision. And because of the settlement of the city of LA with the homeless advocacy groups, and our hands are tied. And she also said, well, how do you know there's not everybody down there's a drug addict and a drug dealer? And I said, no, they're not, but walk down there with me and look at my pictures, 80% of them are, and so, but the big thing was just our hands are tied because of these decisions that occurred. So what I do, go back on Wikipedia, talk to neighbors and get on my Wikipedia and talk to my wife, Michelle, who's done a lot of good homework too, and other neighbors. And we found out, and we looked up the Martin versus Boise case. What was it? In Boise, Idaho, the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals basically overturned a lower court's decision, and they decided that the city was criminalizing homelessness on the false premise that the homeless had a choice in the matter. So it comes down to choice. Are you choosing to be homeless or not? Another thing, as they said, is that part of the fundamental definition of being a human being is you have to sleep. And you don't have to own a home. Therefore, you can sleep anywhere in public because that's part of the definition of being a human. But there's a kind of some fundamental problems with that. One is, did the Ninth Circuit have the authority to determine the definition of a human being? Does a human being have to sleep, and therefore they got that determination? And like, it's kind of a stretch, because one of the extrapolations is, well, part of being a human being is you have to defecate and urinate. Well, therefore, if you don't own a toilet, do you have the right to do that in public? Like, what's this definition of being a human being, and what do you have the right to do in public versus not? And they decided having a home was part of it, or at least being sheltered. And so that may get kicked up and appealed or whatnot, but that was their decision. And they basically said that cities cannot prosecute people for sleeping on the streets if there's nowhere else for them to go. So the second thing that happened in Los Angeles after this, we call it the Boise decision, is May of 2019, which was literally just, 5 months ago. Some homeless advocates and attorneys, I don't know if the ACLU was involved specifically, but definitely some homeless advocates and 5 homeless people sued the city of Los Angeles, and they had a settlement. They got money, and they also had a settlement. The settlement basically said for 3 years, it limits what items can be seized off the streets in downtown Los Angeles. You can't seize anything without evidence that it's been abandoned, presents an immediate threat to public safety, is evidence of a crime, or is contraband, whatever contraband is anymore in these days. But basically that has allowed the encampments to proliferate. There's tents and mattresses and couches and credenzas and coffee tables all over our streets now because the city no longer can remove it unless it poses an imminent threat to public safety. And I don't want to make too big of, I don't want to inflammatorize or make too big of a deal of small things, but it does kind of irritate you when you're walking down there and you hear about these down and out homeless people who are just a bit down on their luck, and they literally have a coffee table and a credenza, and there's 4 guys laying out on the couch with their feet up, just shooting up and doing drugs and chit-chatting at 70-degree weather. It's annoying. It's kind of a slap in the face of, look, do you really need help or not? Or are you just abusing what's going on here? And so part of the settlement said that they can't remove stuff off the sidewalk. And then part of it too was that the Boise part and the settlement with LA was between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. you're allowed to set up a tent and camp in a public place. There are some restrictions like certain driveways and stuff like that. But basically, and that's part of why the drug dealer in our neighborhood was setting up the tent and showing up at 10 p.m. and dropping off all the drug addicts and shooting up at 10 because he knew the rules. You couldn't get rid of a tent at 10 p.m. because they're allowed to sleep in public, even though they were shooting up and it was basically a crack house. So the summary is the Boise ruling says to be human allows you to sleep in public unless society has provided you a place to sleep with a shelter. The LA settlement says you can camp between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. in public places, and the city cannot seize property left on the sidewalks during the day. The city says, and the city's now saying, well, they can't clean the streets because of all the belongings and the furniture on the streets. It's hard to clean. And the police are saying it's harder to monitor the drug dealing, the human trafficking, the prostitution, and all the stolen property because they can't enter the tents without probable cause because it's like entering your house. So they can do anything they want inside the tents. So, next topic. Homeless facts. Some facts I've learned in the past couple of weeks. U.S. homeless population, 24% of it is in California. Of the 60,000 people that are homeless in L.A. County, 19% are from out of state. Fascinating story, July 2018 in the Orange County Register about drug clinics that were in LA, in California, that are enticing drug addicts from all over the country to come to California, paying for their flight and their bus ticket to get here if they had insurance. The insurance pays for short-term drug rehab, and so they use up all the insurance, take all the money. Once the money runs out, they kick them out on the street. And now they're in California with nowhere to go, no family, no money, so they turn to start robbing and stealing and continuing their drug habits. And this is and one of the things is the sheriff in San Clemente said the sheriff's department doesn't keep stats on how much of this is going on because they're afraid of being sued for monitoring recovering addicts. How crazy is that? They're too scared to even monitor the situation because they might get sued, and then they have to settle for whatever, a couple million. Here's a great quote from a drug addict from Texas. In Texas, I did 6 months for possessing a gram of meth. Out here, I might get a ticket for it. So something's got to, I don't know how big of a percentage of the people on our streets are this, but there's stuff like that just makes you think, whoa, we need to get control of this situation. Okay, so now what did I move to? I moved on to social media. And social media, Nextdoor app, Facebook, Instagram, Citizen, and all this kind of stuff. And I started putting pics on Nextdoor and reporting crimes and what was going on. I posted pictures of the farmer's market with couches and tents and all this leftover stuff right behind the food trucks, and the women running the bread stand had surgical masks on because of the smell of urine at our farmer's market. So I posted pictures. I took a lot of heat. Some people said I was trying to ruin the farmer's market, and which couldn't be further from the truth. I was just couldn't believe nobody was talking about this. It was crazy. This is a good quote from Nextdoor. Nirav Tolia, the founder of Nextdoor app. We've noticed that neighbors, when they can easily connect and communicate, band together to create safer neighborhoods, Tolia said. We believe neighborhoods that use Nextdoor will lower crime rates. I agree. These phones are so powerful. You can take pictures and videos, text them, share them with each other, and that worked for me and worked for us. We busted a couple people because we're sharing pictures going, hey, we saw this guy here, here, and here, connect the dots. But guess what happens on Nextdoor? That Starbucks picture I told you, the guy shoots up, passes out right in front of me. I took his picture. He was slumped over. He couldn't see his face. I posted on Nextdoor and said, we got people shooting up right here and all this other kind of stuff. Guess what? Somebody reported me for shaming. And so I'm banned from Nextdoor because they said I was shaming this guy. You know my response? Well, he was unashamed enough to shoot up in front of me in public. I just documented what happened. If he was so unashamed, how can I be shaming him? Who are you to put the label on what's shaming if he doesn't even consider it shaming? Anyway, so it's unfortunate because I think Nextdoor is a powerful tool, and these phones can work for us and help us band together and get control of things. Facebook is great. Some people on Facebook shared with me Seattle is Dying is a great documentary to watch. It's on YouTube. And Dr. Drew's videos. And Dr. Drew was the first time I heard somebody say this is not a housing crisis. This is a mental health and drug crisis. I've been saying drug and crime. In my neighborhood, I don't really see mental health To me, schizophrenics are talking to themselves and mumbling around and completely disheveled and out of it, but maybe a bit of both. I guarantee you one thing, crystal meth rots your brain. I've spoken to some of the guys down there. They start to talk and they just jumble and trail off. So it's hard to distinguish between the two. But anyway, Dr. Drew says most common is drug addiction, opioids, and crystal meth, but also bipolar and schizophrenia are big. And this time, while he's saying this, the LA Times is quoting less than 1/3 of homeless people either have a drug addiction and or a mental health problem. And I'm going 80% in my neighborhood. Don't give me that less than 1/3. That's crazy. And 29%. And so I'm as a doctor, I'm thinking, well, where are we getting the data? Who's collecting the data? Is this homeless advocates who are going downtown and asking people, hey, you don't really do drugs, do you? And the person goes, nah. And they go, okay, that's a no. Like, how's this occurring? Because if the homeless advocate whose job or compassion or whatever has a bias to not want them to be drug addicts so that they get more compassion, so they get more funding and resources, and if the person on the street is smart enough to know the same thing, well, then the data is going to be underreported. It's pretty obvious to me. And so, luckily, the LA Times yesterday, I've been writing letters to the LA Times all the time. Steve Lopez, he's done a good job, but he has not talked about the drugs and the crime. I've been writing them letters and stuff like that. Finally, yesterday, they reported they did their own survey, and they found that 67% have a mental health and or a drug problem, not 29%. Thank you, LA Times. They published it. It was great. And they also quoted UCLA's study that showed 75% have a substance abuse problem and 78% have a mental health problem. So it's been underreported, and finally people, how are we going to address a problem unless we know the truth and when we know what to deal with? Our councilman, Mike Bonin in West LA, still has not acknowledged the drugs and the crime issue. Even the mental health, he's still calling it a housing issue. So hopefully he reads the LA Times, and hopefully he'll get on board and help come up with a solution for this. First solution, acknowledge the truth. All right, what about mental health disorders? What did I learn from that? In the 1960s, the Lanterman-Petrus Act in California changed the criteria of being greatly disabled. It changed from need for treatment in medical terms, do you have a need for treatment, to are you a threat to yourself or to others? So when 5150s in medical in hospitals now is, are you a direct threat to yourself or other people? Put you on a 5150 hold for 3 days until you can really prove it. Otherwise, they get released. Whereas back in the 60s or the pre-60s was, do you need need for treatment? And so that was a big change. The ACLU was fundamental in that, in changing that. It's civil rights, it's individual rights, and everything else. You can't force people. Remember, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and packing mental health people in there. Jack Nicholson wasn't crazy. He was just demented, but packing everybody in there. And so they got everybody released. And I don't know the story behind Reagan. Everybody here claims Reagan, and my mom too. Sorry, I won't call it my mom. Claims that Reagan just shut down all the inpatient facilities, did not build outpatient facilities, and they all just got released on the street. Maybe so. In 1963, the Community Health Act was passed that basically released patients from the mental health state hospitals. But part of my issue is, it's been 56 years. So, it's been a long time. Why haven't we invested in the outpatient clinics over the last 40 years? Well, maybe it's time. Raise taxes more. We already pay the highest, state and sales tax in the country. Raise it 5%. I'll pay. Just come up with a plan to address the mental health and the drugs and the crime. One other thing I want to say is, we have conservatorships currently for people with mental health issues like dementia and Alzheimer's. You start to lose your ability to make decisions to take care of yourself, you can get a conservatorship and other people can make the decisions for you. Well, schizophrenia and some hard bipolar disorders may qualify for conservatorship. We may need to look into that to change that, to soften the rules a bit. All right, what about the health issue? Dr. Drew's been great about this too. The encampments have increased the trash and the rats in the city of Los Angeles and all over the streets. According to him, there's 12 million rats in Los Angeles now. Just crazy. They're certainly running around my yard. And that has increased the incidence of tuberculosis, measles, and typhus. Typhus, there's 10 times more cases of typhus today than there was just 10 years ago. And we had eradicated typhus. And he claims the bubonic plague may come back. It's like in 1% of the rat population right now. If it increases to 2%, then it starts to infect other carriers and people potentially. How crazy would that be? So there's a health problem that's going on. What about the trash that's all over the streets? Is it just going down the storm drains? Is that really all being filtered? I got to tell you, I don't even really want to go jump in the water anymore. Where's all that stuff going? Maybe I've been negligent or ignorant in the past. It's always been dirty, but I don't know. Minor point. And businesses have been dumping trash on the corner of the sidewalks in downtown LA where all the homeless people stuff is. Businesses have been dumping their stuff too. And that's got to stop and be illegal. But it also is a testament to the breakdown of general order. Why do I have to follow the rules if other people aren't? Are you really going to give me a ticket for not wearing my seatbelt when people are laying out on the street and shooting up and doing drugs? Are you going to give me a ticket for building a 10-foot high fence around my property to protect myself if it doesn't fit the codes when you're not protecting me? So anyway, sorry, my mild divergence. Next, what did we do? We marched on Garcetti's house. That was super fun. On Nextdoor, I heard about it. Hey, let's go march on Garcetti's. We're going to have bands, feed the homeless people. Homeless people can stay overnight. I was like, I had no plans on going. An hour before it's supposed to start, I turned to Michelle. I said, let's go see what's going on. We show up. And Kevin for mayor, I've researched Kevin. I've met him. He seems like a pretty reasonable guy, pretty neutral, apolitical guy who just wants to help fix Los Angeles. And so, interesting possibility. Anyway, disappointing turnout. We've done it twice. Not many people show up, 20 to 30 people. We still had a good time. We still protested. We still yelled. We made our signs, stuff like that. And, it just kind of reminds me that people complain, people have a lot of issues, but who actually shows up for the march? As the great Macklemore says, don't show up for the march. And people just don't show up, but that's okay. We met a lot of other people from Los Angeles, all parts of LA, who were equally upset. And we had a meeting, and we got together and talked. We started a group called Fight Back Los Angeles, which is a loosely organized group with not really well-defined agendas or principles, but it's basically to say, look, we need an outlet to share information about what's going on so we can find some truth and some middle ground, because we're not getting it from our political leaders right now. They're not acknowledging the reality of what we're living with. How are they going to fix the problem? They're just talking about the housing situation. Fix what we see. And basically, the political leaders are calling us NIMBYs. They're saying we're not allowing the housing to be built in our neighborhoods. That's the only thing holding us back right now. Well, let's go into that a little bit. The Double H bond raised $1.2 billion. That's what we paid. We agreed to pay $1.2 billion. They're building studio apartments for a minimum of $600,000 each. $1.2 billion divided by $600,000 equals 2,000 apartments. We have 60,000 homeless people in LA, and we just built 2,000 apartments. That doesn't add up. It's not cost effective to build studio apartments with the money that's being raised. And another part that it raises is, here's one thing. They put in the LA Times today. The LA Times today raised that issue. I'm so happy. The LA Times is coming around sharing the truth. And they basically, today they said 40% of our $1.2 billion, our money, 40%, went to soft costs, non-construction, fees, consultants, and financing. So no wonder why nobody wants the government to build things. 50% is disappearing on soft costs. And another point that raises for me is, when did we decide as a society that just because you choose to live in an area allows you to live there? And that other people are obligated to build you shelter, an apartment, or whatever in that neighborhood? I want to live in Beverly Hills. I can't afford it. I love Mar Vista, but would I take Beverly Hills? Yeah, I can't afford it. So if I just show up there with a tent and camp out for a couple of weeks, does that give me the right to live there? And does that mean the people who live there currently have to build me a place? That's a crazy principle. And I'm not saying I am in favor of spending more money, my own money. I will spend more money to solve this problem. But it can't just be build houses and studio apartments and whatever people want, wherever they want to live, for anybody from all over the country. That's crazy. All right, AB 1197. I know there's a lot of information. AB 1197 is a California bill that allows the city of LA to build permanent supportive housing, bridge housing, and shelters. Low barrier. What does low barrier mean? It means there's no restrictions on drug use, and they can come and go any hour of the day. Between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., most shelters are closed. These will be open so that they can leave at 2, 3 in the morning and shoot up and come back. That's what low barrier means. That's what passed. This thing passed last week in the state of California. That allows the city of LA right now to build these low barrier shelters. The zone is mixed use or non-residential multifamily uses. So if there's a mixed use like business and apartment in your neighborhood, they can build a low barrier shelter with no environmental reviews. They don't have to look at traffic. They don't have to look at the neighborhood. They don't have to look at anything. They can build it now. That's what passed. We already allowed it to pass. That's coming right now. Did you know that the shelter occupancy in Los Angeles last quarter and last year was 74.5%? 75%. Right now, there's not enough shelters to house every homeless person. But they're not even full. 25% empty average every night. That's crazy. So how can you assume just because you're going to build a shelter in my neighborhood that that's going to solve the homeless thing? There are empty beds right now. If you don't force them to go, or if you put any kind of rules where they can't come and go and do drugs all night, then they're not going to go. That's got to change. So now here, Mike Bonin, our councilman, and Gavin Newsom and Garcetti are saying the biggest thing is to build these shelters and build the housing and stop being NIMBYs. Well, that doesn't add up. The money doesn't add up. The rules don't add up. And they don't have to go. They're not going now. That's crazy. We got to change that. It takes more than we're being offered right now. So the conclusion. We have a natural disaster on our hands. It's like a hurricane just ripped through Los Angeles and 60,000 people have been displaced. Not to mention 75% are on drugs or have a serious mental health issue. This is a fundamental crisis that we need to deal with today, immediately, right now. Disease rates we haven't seen in years, typhus and different diseases coming back. There's trash everywhere. Drug addicts and drug dealers are controlling our streets. They're all over the place. Leaders calling it a housing crisis. Their solution is to build these low barrier shelters and raise more taxes and ignore the drugs and the crime that we're living with. That's not good enough. We need a comprehensive plan. I appreciate you joining me. Next week will be part 3, which I hope to offer some solutions, some common sense middle ground. Part 3 is called The Reckoning, what we can do about this. Thank you.